Like, I mean, choosing a bad book is easy. Choosing a good book, when this is a 4.5 on Goodreads, yeah, right. Oh no. Hi, today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read. Oh no. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the last 2 months, which is June and July. I also wrote a bunch of notes on each book, just like, can you even see that? I wrote a bunch of notes on each book just so that I kind of had an idea of like what I wanted to talk about for this video. The first book I'm going to be talking about is Scythe. I am ashamed of how long it took me to actually pick this book up. I knew this book came out, I think it's 2017, but I've known this book has been out for a couple of years now, and I remember reading the synopsis and thinking, whoa, that's really cool, and just thinking, yeah, I'll read it next time. And like, every time I went to the library, it was always the same thing. I would see it and I would think, next time, I'll definitely get it next time. And next time turned into 3 years later, so here we are. This book is set in a futuristic utopian society. Basically, humanity's been able to overcome poverty, war, hunger, everything. They've been able to overcome even death, which it might not seem like a problem, except population keeps growing, so death is necessary so that the world isn't overpopulated. One of the main reasons they were able to overcome all these things, even death, is due to the Thunderhead, which is, I still don't really understand what it is. It's like this system that overlooks all of the world, and it's like it doesn't have morals. It just kind of does the best for humanity, but it can't interfere with the Scythedom, which is a group of quote-unquote the most moral people who are assigned to basically be Grim Reapers of society, so that society doesn't overpopulate. They each have to have a certain amount of deaths, or like gleanings. They're not called deaths, they're called gleanings. I kind of went in reading this blind because I wasn't expecting a utopian or dystopian novel, simply because I remember reading the synopsis 3 years ago. I didn't actually recall the synopsis. I just remember there being like this Grim Reaper cover, and then like the back literally says "Thou shalt kill," and I assumed it was going to be like a book thief kind of book where death kind of just overlooks at like humanity or something, and like they have to choose. I don't know. I really didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. So my surprise was very, very big when I opened it and realized they lived in a futuristic, like, ultimate utopian universe world or whatever. So yeah, that was interesting. I liked it way more than I was expecting. Dystopia can be very like hit or miss for me. The world is already pretty bad. Like, why would I want to escape into a world that's even worse? Like, no. This is obviously still like under that category, but it's so well executed. There were moments where I was reading it where I literally had to put the book down and just kind of like think, just sit there and think about humanity and what makes us human. Basically, the two main characters are Citra and Rowan, and at the start of the book, like, the stakes are already pretty high. Citra and Rowan have to compete to become the next Scythes, but they both don't want to be Scythes because they both kind of see it akin to like murder, which kind of is. The requirement to become a Scythe is technically not wanting to be a Scythe, because then that makes you a good Scythe. But if you actually want to go kill people, then like that, there's something wrong with you. But just know that there's a huge twist that you kind of see coming, but you're just kind of like, what? And then it just kind of like keeps twisting and twisting and twisting. There was a death that I was not expecting. I was like, what? The game changed again. The game changes multiple times. Last thing before I like leave this book and move on to the next book. I like how the author explores a utopian society, because a lot of times, you know, on the surface level it might seem like a good idea to live in a utopian society, but something that I appreciate about the author is that we're able to kind of look at notes from other Scythes. I found my favorite parts of this book was whenever I was reading Scythe Curry's journal entries, because you could see her appreciation for utopia, or for their utopian society, but you could also see like towards the end, even if like no matter how happy she started the entry or how like upbeat it was, it always ended in like a kind of a bad note. It kind of like left you with like a sour taste, like, oh, this is not good. And there's a passage where she expresses how she would like to believe that humanity in like 1,000 years will have been able to become like, I think, Renaissance painters and artists. They'll know like all the languages of the world, they'll be extremely wise and all that. But she's afraid that the reality is going to be people are going to live to be like 900, 1,000 years old, and they're just not gonna, they're gonna lose the will to live. They're gonna be living without living, essentially. Like everything that makes them human, that makes them like want, there's no reason to want anything anymore, first of all, because you have everything in a utopia, or in their case, in their society. And so then she's just afraid that as the years go by, rather than like just because of human nature, and just because they have, I guess, nothing really to fight for, they're gonna lose that spark to live, and it's just gonna be kind of robotic. 5 stars, absolutely loved it. One of the best books I've read this year, I think. I don't really want to get angry right now. We just came back from a good review. We're gonna go on to another good review. Little Fires Everywhere. This book also came out a while back, and I also didn't pick it up, but hold on, let me turn to my notes. I actually gave this book 5 stars as well. I was really emotional by the end of it. I'm not gonna lie, the beginning was a little dry. Just a little bit. It wasn't too bad. Like, I think a couple pages in, like, the story started rolling, but I will say, like, I think maybe the first 2 chapters, everything's kind of like the story's being set up, and it's a little dry. I was actually gifted this book. I'd seen the Hulu trailer and I'd been intrigued, but I hadn't picked up the book, and for my birthday my friend actually got this for me, so thank you. On one hand, you have Mia, who is a single mother, has 1 daughter, Pearl. She's never had a stable job, a stable life. Pearl's never had a stable life or house or school or friends or anything because of Mia. And then we also have Elena, who is this highly successful person living in Shaker Heights. She has a poster family, or so it would seem, if it weren't for Izzy, who is like this like rebellious child, always constantly fighting with her parents, very progressive, yada yada yada. And Izzy actually forms a really close bond to Mia. Like, Izzy and Mia become really close, and Pearl, Mia's daughter, actually gets really close to Elena's other 3 older children. A lot of times in books or movies, you usually end up picking a side, and you usually know what side to pick on. You know, it's just kind of you have a good side and then you have a bad side. I found throughout this novel, I had a really hard time picking whose side I was on. She did a really good job of humanizing her characters. Like, for example, when you first start reading the novel, you sympathize more with Izzy and you sympathize with Mia, correct? But then you sympathize with Pearl a lot, because you understand, like, you are this child, I think she's like 15, and you've never had a stable home, you've never had like friends, like this whole thing, a stable school life, and now suddenly you do have that. You're gonna want to explore that kind of lifestyle as much as possible, you know, because being lonely, it kind of sucks. As someone who I didn't expect to really side with was Elena, because I saw the way that she treated Izzy, and I was very against it, and I still am against it, but I understood, I guess, psychologically how she came about being that way. And I like how the author explained how Elena came about being that way. Like, she could have just left it at, yeah, for some reason, like, Izzy's just rude and rebellious, so the mom has a hard time. But no, she pinpoints exactly why Izzy became a certain way, and why Elena, and why her relationship with her mom, Elena, became this whole mess of a thing, you know? Yeah, I would say it's a pretty intense book. I liked it, and this ending was bittersweet. It was heartbreaking, and I accepted it. I was like, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense with the rest of the novel. Like, I get it. Ace of Shades. The reason I picked this book up is because of TikTok.
Actually, do not have the best history with TikTok. in terms of like the book talk community, because I've picked up a lot of the books that they've recommended and I've actively hated all of them. Like scroll through TikTok and everyone will love it and I'll think, oh, maybe it's a good book, and I'll pick it up and it will be so mediocre. Like I don't understand. I don't.
Even though I just told you that I hate a majority of the books that I've gotten from TikTok, I still keep on reading the recommendations because they make it sound so good. Like they put on a cute little aesthetic 30-second video and they're like, if you like this book, then you're gonna like this book. And I think maybe this time it will be different, and usually it never is. So anyways, back to the book. Ace of Shades. I want to start off by saying that I actually enjoyed reading this book. Even though it's gonna sound like I absolutely hated it, I don't. I actually enjoyed it. I read the second book immediately after I finished this one. I got this because I don't remember who recommended it. I was just going through TikTok, but they were like, if you like Six of Crows, you're gonna love Ace of Shades. And then literally the little blurb on the top says, House of the Rising Sun meets Six of Crows. Whenever I think of Six of Crows and like Ketterdam, these places, I cannot pronounce the names, I'm so sorry. It's like this very gritty, very dark place. It's, even though there is it's fantasy, there's a magical element to it, it still keeps like these darker undertones to it, and it kind of reminds me a lot of Peaky Blinders. On the other hand, Ace of Shades literally takes place in a city nicknamed the City of Sin. I was expecting like something grimy, mysterious, action-packed thing. Instead we get something more circusy and even like cartoonish. I never really took anyone seriously in the books, if I'm gonna be honest. The main characters of this book are Levi and Ansalta. We're gonna start off with Levi because poor child. He's supposed to be this like big dollar store version of Kaz. Like that's how he's supposed to be marketed. That's how he like tries to market himself. Literally from the first time you meet him, he has no authority whatsoever, even though he's supposed to be like the leader of his gang. He's so unconfident in himself. No one takes him seriously in the book. Like no one really believes in him. In Six of Crows, there's less focus on the magical aspect of the land, even though there's somehow less focus because Kaz's brilliance as a con man just kind of overshadows it all. When you're comparing him to Kaz, there's so much lacking. Like Kaz is a bad person and we know that. He knows that. He doesn't try to pretend otherwise. On the other hand, Levi like couldn't really hurt a fly. In Kaz's case, he's 15 steps ahead of everyone in the book. In Levi's case, everyone is 15 steps ahead of him. It was frustrating. I felt so bad for him. You know who I would say Levi's like, actually? He might be kind of like Jesper, because they both kind of have a gambling problem. Keep in mind this book takes place in a span of 10 days. I'm all for character development. But when you're telling me someone changes their personality and their like goals in life completely by day 5 of being in a new city, I'm just kind of thrown off. Like literally 4 days into this new city and she's like a new person. She's all about the revolution. Like if this was taking place like maybe in the span of like 2 months, I would have believed it. 10 days though? That's not even 2 weeks. Literally 10 days, and halfway through those 10 days, she already has a new personality. King of Fools. That's the second book following Ace of Shades. Maybe a 3-star. It wasn't really a revolutionary book. I actually found myself really frustrated throughout it because it felt like every time they overcame an obstacle or solved a problem, 2 chapters later, the problem would come back. Like, we started off with problems and ended up with basically the same problems but made worse due to the actions that took place in between. There was just like no progress. I hated the end of King of Fools. I thought a lot of things could have been resolved if there was communication. Am I gonna read the third book? Yeah, I'm like a little too emotionally invested at this point to not read it. I will say though, both of these books are pretty enjoyable reads. You will be frustrated. Definitely do not go in expecting any Six of Crows stuff. Alright, we're gonna move in to some other books that I did not particularly like. 3 Dark Crowns. This book had so much potential, and I think that's what hurt the most, was just how much potential this book had. Like, just listen to this. 3 dark queens are born in a glen. Sweet little triplets will never be friends. 3 dark sisters, all fair to be seen. 2 to devour, and 1 to be queen. Basically, every generation, 3 queens are born, and they train in their respective elements. One of them is poison, another one is controlling beasts and animals or whatever, and then the last one is like controlling the elements like fire, water, and stuff. Each queen is supposed to train her whole life to become as powerful as possible in their respective powers. Of the 3 sisters, only one of them really has a full grasp of her powers, which is Mirabella? Yeah, which is Mirabella. She's the one who's able to control fire and water and all that stuff. Catherine is a really, really weak poisoner. The other girl, what's her name? Arsino, doesn't even have powers, so then you're just kind of like, oh, okay, this fierce battle is supposed to take place, but okay. And then Mirabella, the one that actually does have powers, actually doesn't want to kill any of them. She actually loves both of her sisters a lot. And so, like, I liked that idea. I was like, okay, let's explore this idea more. Let's make sure that, let's like see if they're able to overcome their differences and try to overthrow this rule that was made. Yeah, we didn't really see that. They hated Mirabella, and Mirabella was just kind of there. This book was kind of problematic, I'm not gonna lie. There were so many problems to it. In theory, that sounds pretty cool. If executed correctly, this could have been an amazing book. Like 3 queens all having to like compete Hunger Games style to like be the ultimate one ruler. It sounds cool because like you could either take it as they each really compete, or they each decide to like throw the game away and like fight for each other instead of each other, you know? I did not trust any of the men in this book. I was like, oh my god, like, I think there's like 4 other books in this series. Yeah, you can't give me money to read the rest of this series, because it isn't good. I liked, the one person that I liked was just like Mirabella and like Catherine. I liked the poisoner, she was cool. Like, they just really didn't have good story arcs or storylines. Overall, I was really dissatisfied. I actually can't really recall the plot of this book at this point, just because I had such a hard time keeping up with it, like actually turning the page and having to read it. I was just kind of like, what did I read? What was the point? 2.5 stars is my rating for that one. Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood. Unlike Scythe, I actually actively avoided reading this book. Why did I end up reading this book? TikTok. 2 stars, and I'm absolutely being generous. This book was a shit show. This book was so long, and for what? There was no reason for half of this book. I was bombarded with so much information, exposition in this book. You can't tell me you sat through those first 200, 300 pages and thought, I'm enjoying this. Like, no. There's no way. The one character that I actually liked died. I think one of my main problems is she tends to like cliche her own books. It's something that I've noticed. She has like similar phrase, like the same phrases she uses throughout Throne of Glass and throughout A Court of Thorns and Roses, she uses in this one, except she adds like fucking in front of it. Am I gonna be reading the next book? No. No, I was not emotionally invested in this at all. Hunt made me kind of uncomfortable, not gonna lie. I never actually ended up liking Bryce at all. I thought she was very selfish. The only real interesting character was the cat demon dude, and he was only in there for like 2 pages. Certain moments where I was just kind of like, okay, we get it. Like, none of her characters really feel real or original or like there. They kind of all have, they all feel kind of ripped off of like Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses. And it just kind of reads off as like kind of a really bad fan fiction, if I'm gonna be honest. In high school, Sergei Mas was actually one of my favorite authors with Throne of Glass. I actually raved about Throne of Glass so much. I loved Throne of Glass. With ACOTAR, I was in Donella for so long. I genuinely really tried to convince myself that I liked the series, when in reality, I only really liked Resend. And don't get me wrong, Reason's pretty problematic himself. It's just that, like, there's a part of my brain that still likes him. Blows my mind that you can create something as good as Throne of Glass, which I will still say, I thought Throne of Glass was such a good book series. And then go on to create something like this. And, like, the sad part is, I don't even know if I can go back to reading Throne of Glass ever again, just because it feels kind of cheapened. The way she's taken certain elements from Throne of Glass and mixed in with certain elements she got from ACOTAR and mixed it into this book, it made it very, like, cringy and, like, superficial. I think when I was reading Empire Storms, when Manon, like, was ready to sacrifice herself for her 13, I remember I cried so much with that scene. Like, I would go back, like, months later and reread that scene, and I would still tear up because it hit me so hard. And I remember when, like, Aelin, like, baby Aelin, like, came up to help adult Aelin when she was, like, giving up. I remember I cried so much with that scene, too. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is really well written, the world building, everything cool. I feel like she tried to do all of that, mix it in with a bunch of ACOTAR stuff, say it's adult so that she could, like, put in some spicy scenes and, like, spicy words and, like, called it a day. I never expected to read this book just because there was a part of me that's known that ever since ACOTAR came out, her writing style, like, went down. I'm kind of over it, so she's gone. Let's do a good book before we get on to the last book that I hated. The Night Circus. I have, like, mixed thoughts on this book. I think I gave this book a 4 stars. She was kind of dry. She was kind of dry for a majority of this book. We learn about multiple characters. Like, it isn't just 2 characters that we're following. We're, like, following the story of, like, multiple other characters. And, like, rather than making it, like, a fast-paced book that slows down everything just because we're going through, like, so many people. So this is a very, very slow-paced book. I really like the writing style. It brought back a lot of nostalgia simply because I remember growing up, I actually went to the circus a lot. My parents were friends with a circus that came into town quite frequently when I was younger because a couple of the workers were from the same town in Mexico as my parents, and so then whenever they were in town they would call my parents and be like, hey, we're gonna drop off soon, we're gonna be there soon, like, you should bring your daughter. And so I spent a lot of my childhood at circuses, so it's been a while since I've been to a circus, but reading this book kind of brought back that nostalgia, and so I really liked that. The main characters don't actually even meet until, like, the 200th page, and when they do meet, it takes, like, another 100 pages for them to actually ever interact again. Essentially what's happening is Celia and Marco, the main protagonist of the story, they're supposed to kind of fight, or fighting is too aggressive for what happened, but the winner gets to live. So things don't really start to make sense until the last, like, 150 pages of the book. That's when, like, I would say the most, like, the wheels begin turning. And I think the only reason I actually gave this book 4 stars was because of the last 150 pages, because the first majority of the book was very slow, beautifully written, but it was slow, and I kind of like things to, like, progress faster. Something that I really did like is throughout the story there are moments where the author inserts the reader into the story, so you get to experience, like, the circus. I thought that was pretty cool. Although not a perfect ending, it was still a really good ending. It was still really cute. It, like, left, although not a perfect ending, it was still really cute. It wasn't as bittersweet as Little Fires Everywhere. This is definitely more of a happier ending, but it still kind of left me like, ooh. I liked it. I thought it was cool. House of Salt and Sorrow. Yeah, I gave this book 1 star. I actually enjoy horror a lot, and growing up, Barbie's 12 Dancing Princesses was my shit. I absolutely loved that movie. So when I heard that there was a book that combined both of that, the 12 Dancing Princesses and horror, I was like, yes, sign me up. The first a couple of chapters are pretty promising. Essentially what's happening is there were 12 daughters, obviously, 12 Dancing Princesses, and they're all kind of, like, being killed off in very, like, ominous ways, you know? Like, the oldest goes first, and the next oldest, etc., etc. And they're killed in really odd ways. Like one of them like drowns in her bathtub, like the other one like flings herself off of a cliff. It's like this whole thing, and like the sisters think they're cursed. And like the main character, what's her name? Annalay. We're gonna call her Anna. She's like, we're being murdered, dun dun dun, which like, yeah. The entire book just felt very rushed. At a certain point I just really wanted to finish. The story was just very underdeveloped. There was so much room for improvement. This could have been very morbidly fascinating, and it wasn't. Another thing that kind of bothered me was the forced romance in this. This was going a certain direction, and all of a sudden a random dude is introduced. She and him have absolutely no connection. I didn't think it was real for like the majority of the book, because we've already established that things are really weird in that house. So I didn't think he was actually real. I thought he was just like a manifestation of her, of something, of her dreams or whatever. And only to find out that he is actually real and that he is supposed to be taken as a real love interest, I was like, oh. Their chemistry was so not there. It was non-existent. The thing I did appreciate was, now that I recall, was it was pretty scary. Like with certain points of it, there were points where I was just kind of like, ooh, spooky. But not enough. Gods of Jade and Shadow. I've talked about this book before in another review, which I posted a couple weeks ago, or posted like 2 weeks ago actually, where I was mainly reviewing and talking about this book, but I also kind of mentioned this book. This is a Mexican Mayan mythology fantasy book. This is on par with Scythe. Absolutely love it. 5 stars. This book, it takes place in Yucatan, Mexico in the 1920s, and it follows the story of Cassiopeia. She kind of has this Cinderella story going on in the first chapter, because she lives with her pretty evil grandfather and like equally as annoying and evil cousin who kind of just makes her life hell. And she's forced to be a servant to them. And after a fight with her grandfather this one day, she ends up entering his room and pulling out this box that he's never allowed her to touch, and she just assumes that there might be gold or money inside, and she has this like, she's just kind of like, I wonder what he's hiding, blah blah blah. And she pulls it out, unlocks it, only to find a pile of bones in it, and she cuts her finger and like blood drips in, and from those bones like they begin to like form a man, and this man actually turns out to be Huncame, who is a god of death in Mayan mythology. Not only is he a god of death, he's the king of Xibalba, which is like the spiritual realm of the dead, I'm pretty sure. That's something like that. And so she has to go on this like journey, odyssey kind of adventure with him, because he's missing a finger, he's missing an eye and an ear, and like this jade necklace, and they're all very important aspects of him that needs to be returned to him so that he can get his full powers back. And she has to go on this adventure with him because it was her blood that woke him up, and so now she's kind of tied to him. So if he doesn't become like a full god in time, then she dies essentially, because he becomes human. So if that, does that make sense? Obviously she explains that way better. The imagery, the scenes, everything about this book is so beautiful. She's such a good author. I just, again, cannot believe I didn't know about this book sooner. Such a good author. I want to reread this another like 8 times. I want to like ingrain every single page of this book in my memory. It's like a scene where Vucub-Kame, the traitorous brother god of the dead, where he sends like an owl, like a shadow owl, to like stalk Cassiopeia and Huncame, and like the owl captures Hunkame's laugh in a seashell and like drops the seashell back into Vucub-Kame's lap back in Xibalba. And just the way she described that, I was like, the ending for this one, you expect the ending. Like, it isn't a surprise what happens, because the whole book kind of leads up to this moment. Essentially it ends with her going on more adventures with her like demon friend, and just that made me so happy that that's how it ended. The author said it's a standalone, and like it reads as a standalone. I just wish it wasn't. I just wish there were more. 5 stars. Mexican Gothic. I've reviewed this whole book already, and I'll like leave the link below, but 5 stars. Also by the same author, Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a horror gothic novel, obviously mixed in gothic. This book basically follows Naomi. She's this glamorous girl living in the 1950s. She comes a very rich background. Her family ends up receiving this letter, this very, very desperately written letter by her cousin, explaining that she's having visions and that she's gonna die and this whole thing. And so Naomi is sent to help her cousin, who was only recently married to this very strange family. She thinks Catalina, her cousin, might actually need like a psychologist or something, so that's why she ends up going to visit her. Turns out that there's way more happening in the house than originally thought. Naomi enters this house. The family is strange, racist, so much mystery, there's a lot of horror happening. This kind of follows Naomi's journey as she tries to discover what's real and what's not. The last two I saved for last just because I kind of want to talk about them together. The first one is The Four Agreements, and it's a Toltec wisdom book. And then the next one is Never Split the Difference, which is by Chris Voss, who was this FBI expert hostage negotiator. And so the reason I wanted to save both of these for last is because they're self-help books, and I find self-help books to be a little bit more like on the controversial, like slightly controversial side. Personally, I think you kind of have to keep an open mind with them. As a reader, you kind of have to realize that not everything that's going to be said in the book is going to apply exclusively only to your life. Like what might be clear to you and what might be like obvious to you might not be obvious and clear to someone else. I personally really enjoyed this book a lot. This book is based off of Four Agreements, obviously. The Four Agreements. Toltecs were actually an ancient indigenous people that inspired a lot of the other indigenous people from Mexico. The Four Agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't make assumptions, don't take things personally, and always do your best. It's a really small book, so I feel like if you have time to read it, you should. If you sit down and you really just read this, you can take a couple notes on it, you will find it helpful, so I liked it. And then lastly, Never Split the Difference. This is by Chris Voss. I remember I was literally watching a YouTube video and like his commercial popped up and I was like, ooh. And then it clicked and I was like, okay, I'm buying the book. I will say that with both of these books, they're books that I actually have to reread again. I don't think reading them one time is very helpful. They're books that you have to kind of come back and read over and over again. I think you guys should really check this book out because you could really benefit from it. Or not. You don't really have anything to lose with reading this book. You learn some behavioral science stuff, you learn some cool history, you learn some tips and tricks that you could eventually use. And I really don't know how to end this, so yeah, that's it. Bye!